Right now, a single 21-mile stretch of water is essentially dictating the price of every single item in your local grocery store.
And the market is completely aware of it.
Right. I mean, it is day 51 of the U.S.-Iran conflict, and the global economy is roughly 48 hours away from what looks like a systemic shock.
Massive shock. Yeah.
Because we have this fraying Pakistan-brokered ceasefire that is just on the absolute verge of expiring.
It's hanging by a thread.
Exactly. Over the weekend, the United States seized an Iranian container ship in the Gulf of Oman, and in immediate retaliation, Tehran just shut down the Strait of Hormuz.
They choked off the world's most vital energy artery in an afternoon.
They really did. So the board is set, the military assets are locked in, and Wall Street is right now actively pricing in the cost of chaos.
Because capital has absolutely no conscience. I mean, it really doesn't.
No, it doesn't care at all.
It doesn't care about the political squabbles in Washington or, the diplomatic theater happening over in Geneva. It only cares about extraction. And right now, we are watching the cold, completely unsentimental mechanics of hard power just collide head-on with global capital.
Which is terrifying for the average person.
It is. We are suspended in literally the single most dangerous space in geopolitics, which is that exact moment right before a market prices in a full-scale war.
And that collision is exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive. In this analysis, we are breaking down a highly critical piece of writing titled The Iran Conflict, Energy Dominance, and the Hormuz Test.
A really brilliant piece.
Yeah, authored by Pedro J. de Leon. It is basically a masterclass in what he calls a Bronx-rooted sovereign perspective on power, energy, and wealth.
It's very pragmatic.
Very raw.
Exactly. Now, to really understand this, we have to look at the severe political critiques laid out in today's source material. The author takes direct, completely unapologetic aim at the current administration's critics,
including some very specific lawmakers in Washington. Right, while vigorously defending a highly aggressive posture on domestic energy and military strikes. But I want to pause here and just make a crucial disclaimer to you, the listener.
Yes, this is important.
Our job here today is not to take a side. We are not here to validate political attacks or, cheerlead for any partisan faction on the left or the right.
We leave the moralizing to cable news.
Exactly. Our mission is strictly to deconstruct the raw geopolitical math that the author presents. We are entirely impartial here. We are just extracting the underlying mechanics of how these policies impact the leverage of nations and, more importantly, your financial independence.
Because the truth is, the math doesn't care how you vote.
That's exactly it. Whether you lean left, right, or completely opt out of the political spectrum, the math at the gas pump applies to you equally.
It's unavoidable.
So let's start right there with the kitchen table impact, because the text outlines some absolutely staggering numbers over just a single weekend of this ceasefire drama.
The volatility is just incredible.
Yeah, West Texas Intermediate, or WTI crude, jumped over 6% to $89 a barrel. Brent crude hit $95.50.
And keep in mind, WTI peaked at $119 a barrel recently.
Up from $57.
Right. It's a violent repricing.
It is. But what really fascinates me in the text is the geographic disparity here. The national average for a gallon of gas is sitting at $3.94.
Okay.
But if you are in California, you are looking at $5.62. Washington State is at $5.15.
Well, Oklahoma is sitting at what, $3.24?
$3.24. Kansas is at $3.25. So you have this massive $2 spread.
That spread is the physical manifestation of vulnerability.
Explain that. How does a conflict 7,000 miles away target Los Angeles so much harder than Tulsa?
You have to look at the underlying infrastructure. The interior of the United States, places like Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, they sit directly on top of localized refining capacity and massive pipeline networks.
Right, they're physically connected to the source.
Exactly. They're relatively insulated because they process domestic crude directly from the ground beneath them. California, on the other hand, operates fundamentally as an energy island.
An energy island.
Yes. Despite being this massive, globally dominant economy, it actually imports a massive amount of its crude oil by sea.
Oh, because it lacks the pipeline connectivity over the Rockies?
Exactly. It's cut off from the rest of the country's pipeline network. So when you shut down the Strait of Hormuz, you aren't just raising the hypothetical global benchmark price.
You're actually cutting off their physical supply line.
You are applying a physical tourniquet to seaborne delivery. California pays an immediate, brutal geographical tax simply because of its structural dependency on foreign shipping lanes.
It's as if the world's most critical toll booth just slammed shut. And within hours, a delivery driver in Oklahoma is paying a geopolitical tax on their route. But the driver in LA is practically paying a ransom.
A ransom is the perfect word for it.
But let's dig into the mechanics of how this bleeds into everything else. Because, you know, if gas goes up $1, people complain. They get angry.
Sure, they grumble at the pump.
But they still drive to work. So at what point does this transition from just an annoyance for commuters to a suffocating structural crisis for the average consumer?
It transitions the exact moment diesel gets repriced.
Diesel specifically.
Yes. You have to look at the cascading effect through the global nervous system. Diesel is the blood of the supply chain.
Okay.
When the diesel that powers freight trucks, cargo trains, and heavy agricultural equipment spikes, the profit margins for every single item inside those trucks collapse.
Because the freight cost just eats the entire margin.
Right. Think about your local grocery store. They operate on razor-thin margins. We're talking maybe 1 or 2% on a good day.
Yeah, grocery is notoriously tight.
So if transportation costs surge by 20% over a 7-week conflict in the Middle East, the grocer cannot absorb that loss. They simply can't.
They pass it directly to you.
Immediately. This isn't just about the cost of your weekend road trip anymore. This is baked-in, systemic grocery inflation.
Wow.
It is the absolute suffocation of small business operating margins.
And psychologically, what does that do to a population? Because if I see gas at $5.60 and then my groceries are suddenly up 15%, my immediate reaction isn't just frustration, it's very defensive.
It induces what I'd call a psychological recession.
A psychological recession. I like that term.
When you realize that the fundamental energy baseline of your life has been indefinitely repriced upwards, your behavior fundamentally shifts. You stop allocating capital to growth.
You stop investing, you stop buying discretionary items.
Exactly. You hoard it for survival. The sovereign realist understands that this is the true weapon of the Hormuz Test.
It's not about the oil itself.
No. The adversary isn't just trying to stop oil from flowing. They are actively trying to weaponize your own supply chain against you to break the economic will of your population.
But to understand if this algorithmic panic is truly justified, we have to ask if this physical threat is actually unprecedented.
Which is a crucial question.
Because the text highlights this quote from Fatih Birol, who is the director of the International Energy Agency.
Right.
And he calls this a major, major threat and explicitly states that the current energy disruption is worse than the combined oil crises of 1973 and 1979.
It's a heavy statement.
It is, and honestly, I have to challenge that assumption for a second. In the 1970s, we literally had cars lined up around city blocks. People couldn't get gas on even or odd days.
The physical scarcity was visible, yes.
Right. And today, the U.S. is the largest producer of crude oil in the world. We have the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We have diversified shipping routes. Aren't we materially much more resilient than we were during, say, the Yom Kippur War or the Iranian Revolution?
You are confusing domestic production volume with global systemic resilience. They were not the same thing.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Yes, the United States pulls far more oil out of the ground today.
Yeah.
But the architecture of the global economy has completely mutated since 1979.
In what way?
Think of the 1970s economy like a reptile. It was cold-blooded, relatively slow, kind of clunky.
Okay, I'm tracking.
If you inflicted a massive wound on it, like a localized oil embargo, it suffered. It dragged itself along, but it survived because it had slack built into the system.
Slack meaning warehouses full of parts.
Exactly. Inventories were kept on hand. The modern, hyper-financialized economy is not a reptile. It is a hummingbird.
A hummingbird.
It is incredibly fast, perfectly optimized, and totally reliant on just-in-time delivery for everything.
Right. Nobody keeps inventory anymore. It's all optimized supply chains.
Right. So if you interrupt the caloric intake of a hummingbird for even 2 hours, it drops dead out of the sky.
Oh, wow. So you're saying the margin for error is simply gone.
Completely gone. We traded physical inventory for high-speed algorithms.
And that fragility is what makes Hormuz so dangerous now.
Exactly. The Strait of Hormuz carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil. The physical volume is massive, yes, but the financial leverage sitting on top of that physical oil is apocalyptic.
Because everything is tied to derivatives.
In 1979, an oil shortage meant a physical line at a gas station in Ohio. Today, an oil shortage means a cascading series of margin calls in global derivatives markets that can wipe out a mid-sized sovereign nation's GDP in an afternoon.
Just a total financial unwinding.
That is why the author identified this as the Hormuz Test weeks ago. A hostile regime doesn't need to physically sink 1,000 container ships.
They just have to threaten it.
They just need to apply a tourniquet to the artery long enough to induce cardiac arrest in the global financial system.
Let's break down that financial cardiac arrest because the text dedicates a lot of ink to what the author calls the speculation premium.
This is where it gets really dark.
It does. And this is where the mechanics of Wall Street extraction really come into play for you, the listener. The numbers show WTI crude spiking 6% over a single weekend solely because of ceasefire drama.
Based entirely on news headlines.
Right. The physical supply of oil in the world did not change by 6% over those 48 hours. The tankers were still in the water.
The rigs were still pumping.
Exactly. So where is that 6% price spike actually coming from?
It comes from the phantom gap between fundamental reality and algorithmic panic.
The phantom gap.
Right. Look, if a waterway shuts down, the cost of routing ships around the Cape of Good Hope increases. It takes longer, it burns more fuel.
Sure, that makes sense.
That justifies a baseline physical risk premium that is just fundamental economics.
Right, a slight bump in price.
But the violent surge to $119 a barrel, that is manufactured. Wall Street is extracting rent from the panic of the American commuter.
Okay, you have to explain the actual mechanism here. How does an institution extract that rent?
It's purely structural.
Because I think the average listener hears hedge funds are manipulating the price, and it sounds like some shadowy cabal of guys in suits in a smoke-filled room.
Right, smoking cigars and laughing.
But it's not a smoke-filled room, is it? It's server farms in New Jersey.
Precisely. Let's look at the actual mechanics of algorithmic front-running.
Please do.
A headline breaks on CNN. Ceasefire faltering, Hormuz closed.
Okay.
Instantly, retail traders and smaller commercial hedgers panic. They log into their brokerage accounts to buy oil futures, right? They're trying to protect themselves from rising costs.
Trying to lock in a price before it goes higher.
But before their order even reaches the exchange, high-frequency trading algorithms, which are operated by massive institutional desks, detect that incoming wave of retail demand.
They see the order flow before it executes.
In fractions of a microsecond. The algorithm buys up the available oil contracts, drives the price up artificially, and then sells those exact same contracts to the panicking retail trader at a massive markup.
So wait, the algorithm is legally stepping in front of the line, buying the asset, and then turning around and selling it to the person who originally asked for it, pocketing the difference.
Yes, and they do this millions of times a second.
That is just, it's highway robbery disguised as market liquidity.
It absolutely is. And then you add the institutional research desks to the mix. Overnight, massive banks like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan will issue revised forecasts projecting, $130 or $150 oil.
Which hits the news cycle the next morning.
Exactly. It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. The media ecosystem, what the author accurately calls the naysayer media, pours accelerant all over this.
They love panic.
They run breathless chyrons about an endless war or a global recession. Even the International Monetary Fund issues warnings about a persistent drag on global growth.
So everyone is just screaming that the sky is falling.
Right. And this entire architecture of panic drives retail money into the market at the absolute top of the price curve.
Because regular people are buying out of fear.
And once that retail money is trapped holding extremely expensive contracts, the institutions quietly dump their own positions.
They sell off.
They short the market, and they ride the price back down when the panic naturally subsides.
Leaving the person in South Philly or Kansas to not only pay $5 at the pump, but also take a massive loss on their brokerage portfolio if they tried to trade the news to protect themselves.
It is a highly optimized wealth transfer mechanism.
But I have to ask, where exactly is the line here?
Between risk and manipulation.
Yeah. Where is the line between a legitimate risk premium that the market naturally needs to price in because, let's be real, a missile might actually hit a tanker tomorrow.
Right.
Where does that end and pure cynical manipulation begin?
The line is crossed when the price movement completely decouples from physical inventory and begins relying entirely on sentiment triggers.
Sentiment triggers, like Twitter trends.
Exactly. A legitimate risk premium looks at actual insurance rates for shipping conglomerates. It factors in the literal fuel cost of a 14-day detour around the continent of Africa.
Physical math.
Physical math. Cynical manipulation, on the other hand, is utilizing algorithmic trading to trigger margin calls and liquidate retail positions based on a single, highly ambiguous sentence spoken by a politician at a press conference.
Which has zero physical reality in that moment.
Zero. When the market ceases to be a price discovery mechanism for physical oil and instead becomes a sentiment extraction engine, you are no longer participating in an economy.
What are you doing then?
You are being farmed.
Being farmed. That is a brutal, brutal way to put it.
It's the reality of the sovereign framework.
But it leads perfectly into the author's proposed defense against this farming. Because if you accept that foreign adversaries will inevitably use global choke points to hurt you,
Which they will.
and Wall Street will systematically use that hurt to extract your wealth, you can't just write an angry letter to your congressman.
That does nothing.
Right. You need a structural countermeasure. And the author argues that the only viable pragmatic shield against this extraction is absolute energy dominance.
Because sovereignty ultimately requires leverage. If you do not control the base layer of your own economy, which is energy, you are entirely at the mercy of those who do. The author analyzes the current administration's approach to this crisis, contrasting it very heavily with past policy environments.
Let's outline that specific playbook as it's described in the text.
Okay.
The administration declared a national energy emergency on day one. They formed a National Energy Dominance Council.
Right.
They unleashed sweeping domestic drilling permits, authorized massive strategic releases from the petroleum reserve, and deployed heavy Navy escorts for commercial shipping in the Gulf.
A total full-spectrum response.
Exactly. And the goal, as the author frames it, is to basically make America the undisputed global energy anchor.
It is a ruthless, highly pragmatic geopolitical countermeasure.
How does the sovereign realist view this?
The sovereign realist views energy dominance not through the lens of domestic political point scoring or, endless environmental debates.
You don't care about the optics.
Not at all. They view it purely as a critical national security shield. If you consistently overproduce energy relative to your own consumption, and you possess the physical export infrastructure to flood the global market at will, you effectively neutralize the Hormuz Test.
Because the bottleneck doesn't matter anymore.
Exactly. You introduce so much slack back into the global system that if an adversary attempts to apply a tourniquet in the Middle East, the global market barely flinches.
And if the market doesn't flinch?
The speculation premium evaporates.
Wow.
You literally starve the hedge funds of the extreme volatility they need to front-run the consumer.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. You kill the volatility by oversupplying the base layer.
Exactly.
But, as the author points out, building the sovereign infrastructure has historically met with fierce, really intense political resistance.
Yes, it has.
And he dedicates a significant portion of his analysis to what he very bluntly calls the flip-flop Hall of Fame.
The very sharp critique.
Very sharp. And again, for you listening, I want to reiterate our neutrality here. We are analyzing this portion purely as a study in how political rhetoric masks the mechanics of power.
We are just looking at the framework.
Right. So the text points to Senator Chris Murphy, who apparently condemned the current military operations around Hormuz as a, quote, deadly trillion-dollar failure.
Right.
But the author immediately contrasts this with the Democratic Party's sweeping unified support for the 2011 military operation in Libya under President Obama.
An operation executed entirely without congressional authorization.
Exactly, and one that ultimately resulted in open slave markets operating in Tripoli.
The author is meticulously peeling back the rhetorical framing that Washington uses to sanitize its geopolitical objectives.
It's pretty damning laid out chronologically like that.
He also targets Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He notes her claims of, quote, grave constitutional violations regarding the current defensive strikes in the Middle East.
Right, citing the War Powers Act, I assume?
Yes. And he contrasts this sudden outrage with the continuous, largely unauthorized use of targeted killings, drone campaigns, and proxy warfare that have spanned multiple administrations seamlessly since 2001.
Operations that often receive zero pushback.
Zero institutional pushback from the very figures currently citing constitutional law as a barrier.
So what is the fundamental takeaway for the listener there? Is the author just saying that politicians are hypocrites? Because, that's not exactly breaking news.
No, it is far deeper than mere hypocrisy.
Okay, tell me.
The analysis fundamentally proves that the media architecture and the political class use identical language terms like humanitarian concern or regime threat or proportional response to aggressively justify military action when they hold the pen.
When they are the ones in power.
Right. And then they weaponize those exact same concepts to attack identical military actions when they are out of power. The words are completely interchangeable.
The morality is just a cloak.
The media coverage is entirely inverted based simply on who controls the state apparatus at that given moment.
That is dark, but it rings incredibly true. And the author ties this back to a deeply pragmatic philosophy regarding energy.
The Bronx Rule.
Yes, the Bronx Rule. He writes that the people screaming the loudest about gas prices right now and the intense economic pain of this conflict are often the exact same political actors who spent the last decade aggressively opposing domestic drilling.
Opposing the pipelines, opposing the refineries.
Right. The very infrastructure that was explicitly designed to prevent this exact geopolitical vulnerability.
Exactly. The Bronx Rule is the ultimate metric of sovereign accountability.
How would you define it?
You judge actors by what they built before the fire started, not by their speeches while the building is burning.
Give me a concrete example of that.
Okay, imagine a city where a vocal faction of civil engineers fights tooth and nail for a decade to tear down the coastal flood walls.
Because they don't like the environmental impact or the aesthetic of the concrete.
Right. They succeed in weakening the defenses. Then a Category 5 hurricane hits. The city floods massively. And those exact same engineers go on national television to bitterly criticize the emergency management director for how slowly the rescue boats are moving through the flooded streets.
Oh, wow. You don't listen to their critique of the rescue boats.
Because they engineered the vulnerability to begin with.
That perfectly encapsulates it.
The author is arguing that you absolutely cannot divorce the $5 gasoline in California today from the years of policy choices that systematically prioritized energy dependency over energy dominance.
You reap what you sow.
If you dismantle your sovereign shield, you actively invite the extraction.
And this framework of aggressive dominance hasn't just shaped the domestic debate. According to the text, it has entirely rewritten the balance of power over in the Middle East.
Yes, the geopolitical landscape has shifted completely.
Which brings us to the Islamabad talks. This is where the hard power we've been discussing actually meets the diplomatic reality on the ground.
The transition from military force to diplomatic leverage is probably the most misunderstood dynamic in geopolitics today.
Why is it misunderstood?
Because the media routinely frames military strikes as a failure of diplomacy.
Right. Diplomacy broke down, so we had to shoot.
Exactly. But the sovereign realist understands that military force is very often the absolute prerequisite for diplomacy to even exist in the first place.
Let's look at the timeline the author provides for Iran, because the shift in their posture is monumental.
It's night and day.
Before February 28th, Iran was entirely unyielding. Their diplomatic stance was just absolute defiance.
Still stonewalling.
They claimed an inalienable right to enrich uranium at whatever level they saw fit. They explicitly rejected a proposed 10-year freeze from the international community.
They even rejected an offer from the U.S. to provide them with free nuclear fuel for civilian purposes.
Right. They said no to free fuel just to maintain their enrichment capacity.
That was the reality when Iran believed they held the leverage.
When they thought we were bluffing.
They believed the U.S. fundamentally lacked the stomach for direct kinetic confrontation.
But look at the landscape on day 51. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has been permanently removed from the board.
The regime's command structure is fractured.
The Iranian military apparatus, which they built up over decades, is rapidly deteriorating under sustained, highly precision strikes.
Their core nuclear capacity has been physically disrupted.
The leverage was violently dismantled. And what is the immediate result?
The Islamabad talks.
The text details 21 hours of intense face-to-face negotiation in Islamabad.
A marathon session.
And the author notes that the Western media immediately spun this 21-hour marathon as failure.
Simply because no signed document emerged from the room.
Right. But the author sees this as a massive structural victory.
To call a 21-hour negotiation a failure because there was no immediate signature betrays a profound, almost willful ignorance of how adversarial leverage actually works.
Walk me through the reality of that room.
You have a radical regime whose central organizing principle, its very ideological lifeblood, has been the chant "Death to America" for 40 consecutive years.
It's their whole identity.
And now their top envoys are sitting across a table from U.S. officials locked in a room in Pakistan for 21 straight hours. What exactly are they haggling over?
Well, according to the text, the U.S. proposed a 20-year pause on all uranium enrichment, and Iran pushed back and insisted on a 5-year pause.
Stop and think about the psychological mechanics of that exchange.
Okay.
They are not debating whether they will dismantle their centrifuge cascades.
Yeah.
They are not debating whether they will pause enrichment.
The weather is already settled.
Exactly. They are literally negotiating the timeline of their own submission.
Wow, when you put it like that.
The underlying framework of capitulation has already been accepted by Tehran. A hostile regime does not sit at a table and haggle over a 5-year versus a 20-year pause if they genuinely believe they can still win the war.
They only haggle when they know they've lost the hard power advantage.
Precisely.
And the author emphasizes that this ceasefire framework covers far more than just the nuclear enrichment issue.
It's a comprehensive regional reset.
It covers the proxy militias operating in Yemen and Iraq. It covers deep sanctions relief, and critically, it covers the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is the choke point we started with.
Right. The author makes the critical assertion here that the military strikes were not erratic escalations by a chaotic administration.
No, they were highly calculated.
They were the physical conclusion to a failed diplomatic era. The strikes forced the adversary onto an entirely new negotiating terrain.
A terrain that simply did not exist prior to the application of hard power.
Because they wouldn't even sit at the table before.
You cannot negotiate proxy militia stand-downs until you decisively prove that you are willing to vaporize the proxy militia commanders. It is a brutal math.
It is. But as we know, structural leverage takes time to cement into actual treaties. You can't just build a 20-year regional peace architecture overnight.
Treaties take months, if not years, of drafting.
And right now, the global market isn't looking 20 years down the road. The market is staring down the barrel of a 48-hour countdown.
We are entering the crucible right now.
Because the current fragile ceasefire expires Wednesday morning, Tehran time.
This is the acute phase of the crisis.
This is where fortunes are literally made and lost by the minute, and where the physical reality of global energy supply just hangs in the balance.
Exactly.
The text highlights the intense ambiguity surrounding this Wednesday deadline. The author notes the former president's deliberate rhetorical whiplash.
The strategic messaging is fascinating here.
On one hand, he states bluntly, if there's no deal, fighting resumes.
A clear red line.
But in the exact same breath, he pivots to, if we need to, I would do that, leaving the door wide open for a sudden extension.
It's engineered ambiguity.
But doesn't that deliberate ambiguity create the exact chaotic environment that Wall Street speculation feeds on?
It does. Ambiguity is a weapon in statecraft, but it is absolute blood in the water for Wall Street.
How does it serve the statecraft side first?
The administration is intentionally keeping the Iranian negotiators off balance. Think about it. If Tehran knows the U.S. will definitely extend the deadline, they will just stall forever.
Right, they'll just keep delaying.
But if they think the U.S. might authorize a devastating, decapitating strike the absolute second the clock strikes midnight, they concede.
Fear forces their hand.
But while that high-stakes game of chicken happens at the state level, the algorithmic trading desks in New Jersey are aggressively feeding on the uncertainty.
Because they trade the swings. So the author lays out 3 very specific metrics to watch in this 48-hour window to cut through the noise.
Yes, these are the real indicators.
First, do the diplomatic talks actually resume in any official public capacity?
That shows intent.
Second, does the Strait of Hormuz physically reopen to commercial shipping traffic, regardless of what the politicians are saying on TV?
Watch the boats, not the broadcasts.
Exactly. And third, does the price of oil hold under $100 a barrel, or does it violently breach that psychological threshold?
Those are your physical and financial barometers of reality.
But the author also gives a really critical, actionable piece of advice for the individual navigating this chaos. Do not add leverage during a squeeze.
This is the most important financial advice in the entire text.
Let's translate that for the listener. Because terms like leverage and squeeze get thrown around on financial Twitter a lot. What does that actually mean for someone managing their own portfolio right now?
Okay, the expiration of a ceasefire is what we in the markets call a binary event.
A binary event, meaning only 2 outcomes.
Exactly. It means the outcome will violently swing in one of 2 distinct directions, peace or war. The strait opens or it remains closed. There is no gentle middle ground.
Right.
If you are using leverage, meaning you have borrowed money from your broker to artificially amplify the size of your trade, a sudden swing against you will trigger an immediate margin call.
The broker wants their money back.
Your broker will automatically liquidate your entire position to cover the borrowed debt, wiping out your capital instantly.
Just a total zero out.
Wall Street institutions absolutely love binary events because the extreme volatility shakes out retail traders on both sides of the trade.
Hey, on both sides, hell?
If you bet on peace using borrowed money and a rogue missile flies, the market spikes and you are liquidated.
Okay.
If you bet on war using borrowed money and they suddenly sign a peace deal at 3 a.m., the market tanks and you are liquidated.
You literally can't win if you're leveraged.
Do not play their game. The house always wins when you borrow their chips during a squeeze.
The author actually offers a fascinating alternative to listening to the talking heads to gauge the real risk of this event. He points to polymarket data as a way to cut through the geopolitical noise.
Yes, prediction markets.
Explain the mechanics of that for the audience, because he advises watching the gap between the stated political confidence and the actual odds being priced in by real money.
Polymarket is a decentralized prediction market where individuals place actual hard capital on the outcome of real-world events.
Not just opinions, but money.
It operates on a very simple, brutal premise.
Mm.
Talk is cheap, but capital is honest.
I love that.
Yeah.
Talk is cheap, capital is honest.
Think about it. If a White House spokesperson goes on television and says, "We are highly confident a diplomatic deal will be reached by Wednesday."
Which is what they always say.
Right. But at the same time, polymarket contracts are pricing in an 85% probability that hostilities resume on Wednesday. You trust the market.
Why? Why not trust the spokesperson?
Because the politician is actively incentivized to manage public relations and calm the populace. The trader on Polymarket actually loses their own money if they are wrong.
They have skin in the game.
Exactly. The sovereign individual understands that the media sells narratives, but capital prices reality.
So if we distill this entire section into a concrete rule of engagement for you, the listener, right now, when you are in the 48-hour window of a geopolitical binary event, the worst possible thing you can do is react emotionally to a headline.
Emotion is the enemy of wealth.
Your job isn't to try to outtrade a high-frequency algorithmic bot based on a CNN push notification.
You will lose that race every single time.
Every time. Your job is to hold your structural position, maintain your long-term strategy, and frankly, let the over-leveraged speculators get wiped out in the volatility.
Precisely. You establish your investment thesis based on structural realities weeks or even months in advance.
Before the panic starts.
When the binary event finally arrives, you sit firmly on your hands and watch the market vote. You protect your capital by actively refusing to participate in manufactured panic.
It's about discipline. As we watch this incredibly tense 48-hour window close, let's zoom out and synthesize the ultimate takeaway for the informed individual trying to navigate this landscape.
It's all connected.
We've spent this time really breaking down the author's intricate analysis of the conflict and his overarching sovereign realist framework.
And if you internalize the core themes of Pedro J. de Leon's analysis, you realize you are witnessing a masterclass in the intersection of sovereign power, physical global choke points, and Wall Street extraction.
They are all feeding off each other.
They are. The pain you feel at the gas pump today, the shrinking margin of your local grocer, is undeniably real. But understanding the hidden mechanics behind it is the absolute prerequisite for financial freedom.
You can't fight what you don't understand.
You must understand that you are routinely paying a speculation premium to institutional capital. You must understand how foreign actors weaponize your own supply chain dependencies against you.
Right.
And you must learn to look at political rhetoric purely as a tool of leverage, entirely divorced from morality.
It all comes back to that Bronx rule we discussed. Judge the architects by what they actually built before the crisis hit, not by their polished press conferences while the city is flooding.
It is the only metric of truth in a system fundamentally designed to deceive you. Who built the vulnerability and who is building the defense?
It's a ruthless, brilliant framework. And honestly, it leaves me with one final lingering thought that really builds on everything we've mapped out today.
Let's hear it.
We've spent the last hour analyzing how the mere threat of a 48-hour ceasefire expiration focused on one single 21-mile physical waterway can extract billions of dollars in speculative premiums from average citizens.
Billions.
It is entirely based on the physical centralization of energy and the financial centralization of fiat markets.
The choke points of the old world.
Right. But what happens when the global economy inevitably transitions? What happens as we move toward genuinely decentralized energy grids and perhaps more importantly, mathematically decentralized currencies like Bitcoin?
That changes the entire board.
When the physical choke points that hostile regimes and Wall Street speculators rely on to extract rent begin to vanish, how will the architects of global leverage maintain their power? Or do they simply lose it forever?
That is the ultimate frontier of sovereignty. When capital and energy can no longer be physically choked by a centralized state, the state loses its primary mechanism of control.
Which is a profound thought to leave on.
Thank you for joining us for this analysis. Keep your eyes on the structural reality, ignore the engineered panic, and fiercely protect your position.